Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the tightest corset your ribs can barely tolerate and sinking gently into a velvety chaise as we explore a time when fainting wasn't a crisis. It was practically a pastime. Picture yourself in a drawing, room filled with heavy damask curtains, a faint tang of lavender and perspiration hanging in the air, and just beyond your field of vision, a chaise longue awaits plush, tufted, and dangerously swoon-friendly. Outside, a horse-drawn carriage. Rattles past. Inside, you just gasp dramatically because someone mentioned ankles. Yes, we're heading into the peculiar world of Victorian womanhood, where being upright for too long was apparently hazardous and fainting in public carried the same gravitas as delivering a monologue, but hey, you probably won't survive this. Not in that corset. Breathing's for the weak anyway, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing where you all are. Slowly drifting off around the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the mirror, shoulders back, stomach forcibly in. The corset, your stylish nemesis, is already laced so tightly you could probably snap walnuts with your waist. Fashion in the Victorian era wasn't exactly wearable. It was more of a daily test of endurance, like a silent Pilates class designed by your least favorite ancestor. The corset wasn't just about looking slim. It symbolized wealth, control, and the ideal of frail femininity. A tightly cinched waist told the world you weren't lifting buckets of coal or chasing after runaway toddlers. You were refined. The fainter you were, the fancier you appeared. Your lungs were merely collateral damage in this performance of gentility. Historians still argue whether corsets actually caused fainting or whether the whole spectacle was more cultural than physiological. But one thing's certain, these fashion staples weren't built for comfort. Whalebone stays pressed in on all sides. Breathing became shallow, digestion sluggish, and bending over. Not unless you were willing to do it in installments. You walk slowly because any sudden motion risks a head rush in your crinoline. A giant bell-shaped skirt supported by a cage of steel sways around you like you're the slightly dizzy star of a musical number. It's all very glamorous until you need to sit. Then the real choreography begins. The layers are relentless. Petticoats over bloomers over chemises, all topped with that metal scaffolding known as the crinoline. You are essentially wearing your own collapsible Victorian yurt. When you finally perch on a settee, you don't so much sit as lower yourself like a controlled avalanche. And yet, this was all perfectly normal. A young lady had her dress laced by a maid, practiced her posture with books on her head, and accepted that occasionally losing consciousness was just part of getting dressed. Some believed corsets promoted health by providing support to weak female spines. Others warned that they displaced organs, shortened lives, and could contribute to what they politely called female complaints, which translated probably just meant help. I can't breathe in this thing. Interestingly, corsets weren't limited to women. Men wore corsets too, especially in earlier decades, to keep up a fashionable figure. But for women, corsetry was more than shapewear. It was identity armor, body language, and class status, all stitched into a single garment, and the tighter the corset, the more likely you were to swoon halfway through a conversation about marmalade. You're starting to feel it now. Your temples throb, your chest feels tight, and every breath is an event. You reach for a hand fan and start flapping it with the fervor of someone trying to summon a rescue pigeon, but no one rushes to your side just yet. Not until you've made the necessary small gasp, widened your eyes dramatically, and let out a murmured, "Oh, I believe I must recline." Cue the fainting couch. But that's for later. For now, let's sit quietly here with our numb torso, admire the wallpaper, flocked, burgundy. inexplicably damp-looking, and try to remember if you had lunch today or just a single bite of aspic suspended in gelatin. Victorian diets didn't exactly help. Meals were long, rich, and confusing, made worse by the fact that many women were instructed to eat daintily in public and binge on blancmange in private. And then there's the season. Summer in London meant heat trapped in every corner of your silk-heavy home. Without air conditioning, all those layers became wearable sweat lodges. Fainting didn't seem optional, it was the only logical way to tap out. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of swooning. Working-class women wore looser garments, often out of necessity rather than choice. Their bodies moved freely, at least compared to yours, and so did their blood flow. Funny how privilege sometimes came with bonus hypoxia. And now you're dizzy again, another gasp. The room tilts just slightly. You press a gloved hand to your forehead. Time to move on. That couch is starting to look awfully inviting. You drift gracefully, of course, toward the couch in question. But not just any couch. No, this is the piece de resistance of a Victorian parlor, the fainting couch. It's not quite a sofa, not quite a chaise longue, but something in between. A hybrid throne for the well-dressed damsel in distress. It greets you like an upholstered wink. One raised side, perfectly suited for draping yourself in poetic English. It's where your ribcage can finally expand after a duel with your corset, and where perhaps you'll be offered a lemon-scented kerchief while a sympathetic cousin fans you with a sheet of last month's Times. Now, fainting couches weren't actually marketed under that name at the time. The term fainting couch came later, possibly invented by 20th century furniture dealers needing a glamorous angle. To the Victorians, this item was simply a daybed or récamier. Still, its purpose was broadly understood. You recline, letting your crinoline spill dramatically off one side. The wood frame is carved with delicate floral motifs, likely hand-polished by a man who had strong opinions on mahogany. The cushioning is stuffed with horsehair, because apparently your comfort should always be just one itchy moment away, but there's relief in the posture. Finally, your diaphragm has the freedom to do its job. The world stops spinning, your temples throb a little less, and someone is handing you a glass of sherry and murmuring something about restoring your humor. The couch was often placed in a quiet corner of the drawing room, sometimes with a small bell nearby so you could summon help without yelling. You wouldn't want to ruin your voice, or worse, perspire. Victorians didn't sweat, they glowed, except when fainting. Then they collapsed, generally without warning and preferably with style. Historians still argue whether these couches were primarily used for genuine medical episodes or whether they just offered a socially acceptable escape hatch from long conversations about gardenias and shipping routes. Some letters from the period suggest they were often used for rest during bouts of fatigue, while others imply they became dramatic props in the ongoing theater of femininity. There's something a little theatrical about the entire fainting experience. The couch itself almost expects you to swoon onto it while clutching a pearl necklace and gasping, "Tell Charles he must carry on without me." You wiggle your toes. Blood is returning. Your spine starts to forgive you. A nearby footman coughs discreetly to remind you that you've been in repose for the better part of an hour. But really, what else would you be doing? It's 1862, and Instagram has yet to be invented. Fainting couches were a lovely way to pass the time between embroidery and contemplating whether the wallpaper is too autumn afternoon or just right. They were also gendered objects. Rarely would a man have one in his private quarters. Gentlemen lounged on smoking chairs or stiff-backed leather armchairs. The fainting couch was feminine curved, vulnerable, and just faintly ridiculous. Much like the role women were expected to play in wealthier households, multiple fainting couches might appear in the more private rooms. offering a kind of sequential napping circuit for delicate ladies. You fainted in the parlor, recovered in the drawing room, and then completed your horizontal pilgrimage in your boudoir, where, if all else failed, you could fall fully unconscious into a cloud of lace-trimmed pillows. But beware, not all couches are created equal. Some were covered in rough damask, others in plush velvet. A few were more for show than rest. The least fortunate among us may have been lowered onto something that squeaked in protest or reeked faintly of lavender and old biscuits. Still, there's something deeply comforting about this furniture, a kind of companion in your breathless battle with decorum. It doesn't ask questions. It just waits for you elegantly, patiently to collapse again. You stretch your legs. The bustle at your back gives you an odd, tail-like silhouette, like a fashionable squirrel. You shift slightly. The couch-sized dot did the Victorians truly need furniture to manage their constant physical collapse? Or was it all an elaborate ritual to demonstrate just how high maintenance they could afford to be? Some say the fainting couch was a practical response to genuine physical constraints, tight lacing, heavy garments, warm rooms. Others insist it was performative, an act of languor that reinforced one's femininity and underscored a woman's supposed fragility. Whatever the case, you're grateful. Because right now, the idea of verticality seems both exhausting and overrated. Outside the window, the sun is making its slow descent. You wonder if it's time to rise, but a second glass of sherry is already en route. Your cheeks regain color. You fan yourself lazily, more for the aesthetic than anything else. A passing cat hops onto the edge of the couch and curls up next. To you, the soft purring feels like a lullaby. Someone plays a waltz faintly on the piano fort in the room next door, and here you are, a woman in repose. Maybe fainting is just another word for resting while dressed like a 9-tiered cake. You blink up at the ornate ceiling, faint traces of gold leaf catching the lamplight. Breathing is easier now, although your ribs are still mildly offended by your earlier corset duel. You could stay horizontal indefinitely, but alas, someone is speaking in hushed tones about the doctor arriving shortly. Not because anything's wrong, of course. Just a routine house call. You know, in case your fainting spells have escalated from theatrical inconvenience to diagnosable femininity, the Victorian physician arrives with a well-oiled mustache and an air of quiet resignation. He carries a satchel stuffed with small glass bottles, folded charts, and something that looks suspiciously like a garlic press. He eyes you over his pince-nez and announces with soothing authority that you may be suffering from hysteria, a word so elastic it could mean anything from mood swings to migraines to having opinions at inopportune times. He murmurs some Latin phrases, adjusts your pulse rate by squinting at your wrist, and takes notes in a tiny, leather-bound notebook. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors genuinely believed in hysteria as a medical condition, or whether it was simply a catch-all for behaviors that didn't suit their neatly corseted expectations. The term itself, hysteria, came from the Greek hystera, meaning uterus. So already, things aren't off to a great start. The diagnosis assumed that the female reproductive system occasionally got bored, wandered about the body, and caused general mayhem. Your uterus, it seems, is a kind of internal raccoon prone to mischief and psychological chaos. You resist the urge to laugh or cry. Either would, ironically, strengthen the doctor's case. He asks a few standard questions. Have you felt fatigued? Nervous? Uninterested in embroidery? Have your fainting spells coincided with stressful events, like accidentally seeing a man's elbows? You nod solemnly because, yes, elbows can be rather abrupt, and then comes the prescription: rest, fresh air, and no intellectual stimulation. Reading novels? Out of the question. Writing letters? Only if they are exceedingly dull. Thinking too hard? Positively dangerous. Of course, not every woman received the same treatment. Wealthy ladies got daily visits and a slow schedule of recovery, often involving a fainting couch, walks in the garden, and the occasional rest cure that amounted to a fancy timeout. Poorer women? They got a pat on the head and a reminder to keep working through it. Still, your doctor seems kindly enough. He offers you a spoonful of something bitter and assures you it'll calm your nerves. You take it. It tastes like regret and tree bark, but almost immediately you feel sleepy. Whether from the tincture or sheer boredom is unclear. There's also the matter of the nerves. The Victorians were obsessed with nerves. Nervous exhaustion, neurasthenia, and nerve tonic. Advertisements filled newspapers. Everyone was either overstimulated or under-reclined. Being high-strung was seen as both a medical issue and a mark of refined sensibility. And you, fainting gently onto upholstered furniture, are the picture of both smelling salts, fans, and fainting couches formed the unofficial holy trinity of feminine medical care. You have now achieved 2 out of 3. Congratulations, some of your friends have gone further, being referred to clinics or spa towns to take the waters. You picture a line of women in damp lace gowns, sipping sulfurous liquid and trying to look enthusiastic about mineral content. It's like a wellness retreat. If wellness meant being damp and vaguely scolded by strangers back in your parlor, the doctor finally stands. He nods to the maid, makes a few extra scribbles in his notebook, and tells you to avoid stress. Not that you had plans to enter a steel foundry or duel a highwayman, but it's nice to be reminded. He leaves a tin of lozenges behind. You suspect. They do nothing except taste faintly of dusty violets. You recline again, thinking of all the other cures women have endured over the centuries. Leeches, mustard plasters, electrotherapy, goat's milk baths. One friend even tried a galvanic corset, an electrical contraption that buzzed faintly, presumably to keep the uterus too confused to cause trouble. She said it made her knees feel like jelly. Whether that was therapeutic or merely unsettling remains unclear. Your eyes drift close for a moment. You picture the ancient Greek doctors who first floated the idea of wandering wombs. You wonder if they ever fainted from their own nonsense. Outside, someone's dog is barking at a lamplighter. The air smells of coal smoke and rosewater. The doctor's visit is over, but the diagnosis lingers. You are officially delicate, possibly even ethereal. Certainly too fragile to deal with the price of lamp oil. You're left alone with your thoughts and your chaise, both of which are slightly over-upholstered. But at least no one is asking you to read anything challenging, lift anything heavier than a lace shawl, or explain why you'd rather nap than attend another charity auction for distressed. Parrots dot you breathe in, deeply this time, no corset today. Just you, the couch, and a highly questionable diagnosis. The salts come out like clockwork, small, crystalline, and stored in a dainty silver vial with a hinged lid that clicks open with theatrical flair. You hold the bottle to your nose and inhale, instantly regretting your life choices. The stinging tongue of ammonia burns its way up your nostrils and makes your eyes water. Ah, yes, you are awake now. You're very awake. Possibly more awake than you've ever been, and slightly furious about it. Smelling salts where the air is equivalent of a car battery to the soul designed to shock the fainted. Body back to verticality with all the gentleness of a brick through a stained glass window. A compound of ammonium carbonate and perfume. These pungent granules were popular accessories in the handbag of any self-respecting Victorian woman. You carried your fan, your gloves, a delicate lace hanky for polite dabbing, and of course, a tiny bottle of wake-up juice for when the corset won. They weren't exactly medical grade, but they were practical. Whether you truly lost consciousness or simply needed a dramatic pause in the conversation, a discreet wave of the salts could restore your place in society's relentless tea and gossip circuit. You sit up slightly on your fainting couch, blinking like a baby owl, as a maid tucks a pillow behind your back. Her expression is somewhere between concern and long suffering. You've used the salts 3 times this week. Your nose has yet to forgive you. Historians still debate whether the salts were genuinely effective or merely symbolic. Some believe they offered just enough shock to revive those truly teetering on the brink of blackout. Others argue they were performative tools, wielded like smelling daggers in an ongoing ballet of social one-upmanship. You remember your cousin, Margaret's infamous faint at the Christmas dinner party. One moment she was sipping soup. The next she had slid gracefully under the table with a thud muffled only by her crinoline. Her mother, without missing a beat, leaned down and applied the salts. "There, darling," she cooed. "It's just the excitement of the parsnips." You yourself have seen the full spectrum of fainting behavior, the slow swoon with theatrical arm fluttering, the dignified slouch into a conveniently placed armchair, the panic flop that resulted in 2 shattered teacups and 1 mild concussion. It's an art form, really, but today's faint was more textbook: corset strain, mild hunger, a strong opinion on wallpaper. Classic triggers. Now, revived, you straighten your skirts and look around as if nothing happened. The other ladies nod. Respectfully, one hands you a fresh lemon biscuit. All is forgiven. The salts go back in your reticule, which jingles faintly with coins, keys, and a folded love note you forgot was there, but smells faintly of violets and stress. You pretend not to notice that the conversation around you drifts into gossip territory. Someone mentions Lady Pembroke's daughter has taken up watercoloring in the greenhouse again. You suppress a gasp. So daring. So botanical. But the air is warm and your temples throb. You sense another swoon might be pending. There's a rhythm. To all this collapse, revive, snack, sip, repeat. It keeps the day moving along nicely with no need to engage in anything strenuous like actual emotion or exercise, or asking your husband why he insists on wearing that velvet waistcoat that makes him look like a decorative footstool. You glance over at the footman, who now carries a tray of small tonic bottles, each promising various cures. One is labeled Elixir of Calm Nerves. Another is simply titled Feminine Drops, which feels suspiciously vague. You select one, sip, and immediately regret it. The taste is somewhere between shoe polish and regret. But your cheeks flush, your pulse steadies, and the conversation about wallpaper resumes. It's around this point in the day that you begin to reflect on the absurdity of it all. The house is quiet, the couch soft, and yet your daily existence seems to involve battling your own body at every turn. All for the sake of appearing exactly as society expects: graceful, fragile, and delicately insufferable. The salts are a metaphor. You inhale something sharp and unpleasant just to remain upright in a world that doesn't really want you to stand too tall anyway. A lady across the room sneezes. Several fans open in tandem, fluttering like startled butterflies. You wonder, not for the first time, if any of you are actually sick or just performing exhaustion like it's part of your piano recital. Smelling salts weren't exclusive to women. Of course, boxers use them to recover after a knockout. Doctors carried them for emergencies. But in drawing rooms, they took on a life of their own, a whisper of distress. A gentle plume of ammonia, and then, miraculously, full recovery just in time for cake. You cradle your tiny bottle, its ornate silver case glinting softly in the candlelight. There's something comforting about its weight, even if it does make you sneeze every time you open it. Outside, the street lamp flickers. Somewhere, a dog barks twice and falls silent. The maid returns with a fresh pot of tea, and you raise your cup like a champ. One pinky raised, nose still tingling, and no memory of what the conversation was before your collapse thought all is as it should be. You've recovered splendidly, really. You're upright, your pulse is politely subdued, and your gloves are back on smelling faintly of rosewater and faint embarrassment. It's now time for that most sacred of Victorian rituals, the drawing room. Drama circuit. This, of course, is where the fainting couch comes into its own. The drawing room is your arena, your stage, your fainting-enabled theater of operations. Everything is choreographed, from the gentle sipping of tea to the carefully timed mention of Lord Featherstone's scandalous ankle tattoo, which may or may not exist. You and the other ladies are gathered like swans around the periphery of the room, all lace and whispered commentary. The fireplace crackles with enough enthusiasm to mildly threaten your petticoats, and the chandelier overhead glints with all the self-importance of inherited wealth. Today's drama? Whether Miss Bellamy's sudden engagement is out of love or the result of an unfortunate picnic incident. You lean forward, already dizzy from the possibilities, but fainting isn't just for personal health, it's for punctuation. It's how you end a boring conversation, distract from someone else's more interesting story, or exit gracefully when the cucumber sandwiches become emotionally overwhelming. Historians still argue whether drawing rooms serve more as social arenas or quiet female sanctuaries. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle. For women, the drawing room was both a refuge and a performance space where etiquette, status, and posture were on constant display. You're expected to listen attentively, but not too intently. Laugh softly, never from the diaphragm. Comment mildly, agree frequently, and if all else fails, you can always faint. Fainting is a lovely way to say, I would rather be unconscious than hear another word about Lady Gosling's upholstery dilemma. The fainting couch in the corner is ready. It's the backup plan, the safety net, the Victorian equivalent of the leave meeting button, that of course, you can't just collapse willy-nilly. Timing is everything. The key is to identify the peak of the conversation. Perhaps someone gasps. You'll never guess who is seen near the orangery. And then, just as the suspense tightens, you press a hand to your temple and slump artfully. Not fully. Unconscious, just enough to inspire a flurry of concern and reposition you at the center of the social constellation. Your friend Louisa is a master of this. She once fainted during a piano recital, and the resulting chaos was so memorable that she received 3 marriage proposals and a fruit basket. You admire her technique. You aspire to it. Meanwhile, the room hums with coded language. Feeling a bit overcome means you're ready to bolt. The vapors is everyone's favorite euphemism, though no one quite agrees on what it means. Possibly a light fever. Possibly gas. Possibly an existential crisis wrapped in lavender sachets. You dap your brow as expected and reach for your fan. The air is thick with perfume, expectation, and lightly suppressed sighs. One woman rises to share a poem about sadness and seagulls. Someone else comments on the weather, and you hear your own voice say, indeed, quite tempestuous. You have no idea what you mean. It doesn't matter. It sounds appropriately Victorian. And then cue the incident. Lady Farnsworth, never one to waste a well-timed swoon, stands too quickly and delivers a perfectly executed head wobble. Her knees buckle, her brooch flies off in protest. She sinks onto the nearest fainting couch with the grace of a well-fed. Swanned out the room erupts not in chaos, but in polite concern. A whisper of, oh dear, ripples through the furniture. Salts are summoned, cushions are fluffed. Someone offers a spoonful of sherry, and the maid begins her slow trot toward the linen drawer. You observe it all with admiration. That's how. It's done. A true swoon. Not too sudden, not too dramatic. Just enough to elicit affection without causing alarm. You glance toward the couch in your own drawing room. It sits in the corner like a waiting stagehand. Fainting couches, after all, are the unsung heroes of social survival. They carry your secrets, your sighs, and your longing to just lie down somewhere that isn't emotionally exhausting. The day wears on. Tea is refreshed, gossip deepens, and the fire begins to fade to a soft orange glow. You've survived another drawing room circuit, complete with collapses, revivals, and several deep dives into the psychology of wallpaper. You think of writing. A letter later to someone you faintly remember from your school days, but that would require emotional energy, and ink, and a quill. And you're not convinced you're ready for that level of commitment. Instead, you stretch your ankles out toward the edge of the fainting couch and sigh softly, content. The couch receives you like an old friend. Outside, the sky burzes into twilight. Inside, you consider whether Lady Farnsworth's faint was sincere or part of her larger plan to secure the best. Slice of lemon cake? You'll never know. And perhaps that's the magic. In this world of tight laces and tighter expectations, the fainting couch is your ally, your exit ramp, your line of defense against the ceaseless assault of small talk and societal pressures. And you, reclining gently, are the reigning champion of decorous escape. You're reclining still, your limbs arranged in that vaguely strategic way women are taught, just enough elegance to look serene, not so much as to seem calculated. Across the room, tea is being poured into cups so fine they tremble at a strong breeze. A biscuit crumbles midair. A polite chuckle ripples through the gathering, but you are observing, waiting, and contemplating the delicate art of the swoon as strategy. Because make no mistake, feigning, for all its dramatic flair, had its uses. It wasn't just the result of oppressive corsets or overheated parlors. No, it was a multi-purpose social tool, a pressure release valve for the overstimulated and underempowered. When you had no vote, little voice, and a schedule full of visits to people you actively disliked, a well-placed collapse was practically a superpower. You've used it yourself. Once during a particularly harrowing reading of a 14-page dinner. Blessing. Another time when a suitor insisted on showing you his etchings for the third afternoon in a row. And famously, though you still deny this at the very moment someone hinted, you might need to start managing the household budget, historians still argue whether these strategic swoons were conscious acts of rebellion or subconscious survival tactics. Some scholars suggest women leaned into the role they were handed, weaponizing fragility like a velvet sledgehammer. Others argue fainting became an almost involuntary habit, so ingrained in daily life that women collapsed out of muscle memory. More than intention, either way, you knew what you were doing, or at least your body did. The swoon could shut down a conversation, defer an unwanted proposal, or prevent you from being the one to pass the salt. It allowed you to avoid conflict without ever raising your voice. In a world where raising your voice would have been considered worse than fainting at a funeral, this was no small thing. It was, in short, the closest thing to a skip scene. Button you had. Louisa once avoided a trip to Wales by fainting gracefully into a geranium bush. The resulting scratches kept her home for 3 weeks. Glorious. And that time you feigned. Dizziness during Great Aunt Belinda's annual needlepoint critique? Legendary. The woman still believes her feedback drove you to collapse and treats you with reverence to this day. Even men weren't immune to the faint-induced panic. A fainting woman required attention. She brought the room to a halt. She changed the subject. In a sense, she reclaimed the narrative, however briefly by making herself the problem no one dared criticize. And yet, the trick was subtlety. Too many swoons, and you were labeled melodramatic. Too few, and people might think you were robust, possibly even opinionated. You had to land precisely in the sweet spot between delicate flower and professional inconvenience. So, You practiced in mirrors and gardens. Once disastrously near a goose. Your posture had to be loose enough to seem involuntary, but not so loose as to damage your hairstyle. No one wanted to faint and rise with one side of their chignon tragically askew. The fainting couch became your co-conspirator in these tactical retreats. It was always nearby, a silent accomplice, and it knew. It remembered the time you faked. A dizzy spell to get out of charades. The moment you swooned during a political argument and then eavesdropped from your semi-reclined position with one eye. Half-dash open. It was on that couch you perfected the semi-swoon. Not quite unconscious, but just distant enough to be excused from conversation. You'd simply let your head tilt, eyelids droop, and take slow, dramatic breaths like you'd been overcome by the sheer, emotional weight of someone else's monologue. The staff learned to read the signs. A maid would discreetly close the curtains. A cousin would fetch a fan. Occasionally, a friend would whisper, "You can stop now." Lady Tipton has gone back to talking about her canary. Still, it wasn't always frivolous. Sometimes the faint was real, triggered by fear, frustration, or the slow throb of life closing in around tightly laced ribs. And in those moments, you were grateful to simply lie still, pretend, and breathe. Without expectations, strategic or not, the faint offered respite. Permission to rest, time to reflect. And in a world that rarely stopped spinning, even at the pace of a horse-drawn carriage, it was something. Outside, a carriage wheel hits a pothole. Inside, you start to feel a new wave of fatigue. Not the performance kind, but a gentle hum in your bones. Perhaps it's time for another withdrawal. You murmur something about needing air. Everyone nods solemnly, impressed by your bravery. You make your way toward the couch once more, letting your fingertips brush the edge of the table, your gait just uneven enough to suggest fragility, a gentle sigh, a tilt of the chin. You fold yourself down like a silk handkerchief and close your eyes. The conversation floats on without you, thinner now, punctuated by occasional glances in your direction. You've left the scene. While remaining entirely present, fading, it turns. Out is a performance, but it's also a strategy, a boundary, a buffer, a way of saying enough without ever having to say it aloud. Steam curls up around you in lazy, languid spirals. You're seated in what your physician enthusiastically calls a therapeutic bath, and what you, if you're being honest, would describe more accurately as extremely warm regret. The tiled walls glisten with condensation. Somewhere nearby, a maid hums softly as she prepares your post-soaked towel, which is currently roasting near the hearth like a domesticated marshmallow. Welcome to the luxurious, occasionally perplexing world of Victorian hydrotherapy, where the solution to nearly everything was to get either very wet, very steamed, or very confused. Today, the prescription is for nerves. Not that yours have done anything particularly offensive lately, but you did sigh quite dramatically during dinner yesterday, and so now here you are, neck-deep and steaming. Herbal broth with a sprig of something vaguely medicinal stuck behind your ear. Historians still argue whether these sanitary treatments were genuinely helpful or just the 19th century equivalent of a very expensive spa day. Either way, the Victorian obsession with bathing and being bathed upon by others knew few bounds. The water smells of lavender, mint, and a touch of eucalyptus, though you suspect that last one might just be from a cleaning rag. The effect is not unpleasant. In fact, the warmth is lulling. Your corset's absence is a minor miracle, and for once your lungs are allowed to expand without sending you into a swoon. Steam baths were believed to clear the mind, settle the stomach, purify the skin, and frighten off vague illnesses like melancholia, fainting fits, and unladylike ambition. Sometimes they even worked. Other times, they simply turned your fingers into prunes and made you late for embroidery class. You close your eyes and let your thoughts drift. Perhaps you're at a fashionable bathhouse and bath, no pun intended, surrounded by pillars and echoes. Perhaps a nervous physician is scribbling notes on your pulse as you recline, wearing a linen robe and the expression of someone who's been told not to think. Victorian water treatments ran the gamut. There were cold plunges for reinvigoration, warm soaks for calm, and something ominously called the douche massage, which you do not wish to discuss. Add in foot baths, mustard baths, mineral baths, and even electric baths, yes. Electricity was involved, and it becomes clear the Victorians were either on the cutting edge of wellness or inventing increasingly creative ways to faint without judgment. One of your more fashionable friends once invited you to a hydrotherapy retreat in Switzerland. The brochure included things like forest breathing and thermal mud immersion. You politely declined after hearing someone had mistaken a decorative koi pond for the women's treatment pool. Back in your bath, the water is slowly cooling. A maid knocks gently and offers a fresh bundle of dried herbs to steep near your ankles. You nod graciously, pretending to understand what they're meant to do. Perhaps ward off nightmares or moths. You're not picky. There's something deeply soothing about this moment. No corsets, no judgment. Just you, some warm water, and the sense that for once your body isn't a corset-bound diplomatic envoy of social grace. It's just a body with bones and soft skin, and maybe even opinions. It's a rare thing to be allowed this kind of solitude in an age that measures women in size and silences. The treatments go beyond the bath, of course. You've heard of vinegar compresses for fatigue, leech therapy for circulation, and even hot bricks wrapped in flannel to restore inner equilibrium. A friend once had a sage smoke facial that left her sneezing into her petticoat for a week. Doctors prescribed these things in earnest to real symptoms, often caused by the very social structures they upheld. They'd whisper about female weakness, then suggest you spend more time being steamed like a medicinal dumpling. Historians today note the deep irony. Women were weakened by restrictive clothing, denied access to exercise, mental stimulation, or independence, and then treated for the exhaustion caused by all of it with eucalyptus foot scrubs. Still, you don't mind the occasional spa day. Who would? You emerge pink-skinned and towel-wrapped, feeling soft and sleepy. The maid helps you into a loose robe. You could faint from contentment alone. No drama needed. You're led to a chaise near the window, where a gentle breeze filters through muslin curtains. Your skin tingles. Your limbs feel like boiled pasta. In a good way, you sip a cup of weak lemon tea, thoughtfully provided for rebalancing. Your humors, whatever those might be. Someone somewhere is probably writing a pamphlet about your spleen. You wonder whether the steam did anything for your nerves, or whether it simply gave you an excuse to sit still without answering questions. Either way, it worked. Outside, a bird chirps precisely once, then appears to change its mind. The clouds hang heavy and gray, like old lace. You breathe deeply, noticing again the space in your chest, the freedom to expand out your fainting couch. Awaits, of course, ever faithful. But for now, you are cleansed, restored, and pleasantly moisturized. Maybe next time, they'll try the mustard poultice. Or not. Let's not get too wild. You're back home, robed and recorseted. A little damp around the hairline from your spa venture, but otherwise glowing with that flushed post-bath serenity that says, I've survived herbal boiling and am now ready to re-enter society gently. As you rejoin the sitting room and settle onto your ever-loyal fainting couch, you reach for a tome with cracked leather binding and a faint smell of mothballs and laurel. Instruction. Yes, it's time to consult the etiquette manual. You flip through its pages slowly, as though each might detonate if turned too quickly. The book is heavy not just physically, but philosophically. It is filled with rules, so many rules. On posture, on greetings, on the appropriate number of seconds to allow eye contact between betrothed. Parties in public, spoiler, very few. These books were serious business. A blend of behavioral how-to and spiritual checklists. Victorian etiquette manuals were the sleep-deprived Google of their day. Need to know whether you can write a thank you note in blue ink? It's in there. Wondering how to politely exit a conversation about horses? Consult Chapter 9, subsection Polite Withdrawal while maintaining equine respectability. You scan the chapter titled On the Graceful Bearing of the Modern Lady. It recommends that one never sit fully back in a chair, too indulgent. Never cross one's legs at the knees, invites chaos. And never speak above the volume of a falling handkerchief. You breathe deeply and resist the urge to laugh out loud, although that too would be discouraged. One must merely titter, or at most emit a musical exhalation of delight. Historians still argue whether these manuals were genuinely helpful tools for navigating complex social landscapes or just anxiety-inducing instruction guides designed to keep women too busy with napkin folding to develop opinions. E Tracer. Finger down the next section, responding to illness in public. Here we are. Fainting is covered in great detail with helpful illustrations. You're advised to carry smelling salts discreetly, to allow yourself to be reclined by a trusted person, preferably with gloves, and to avoid speaking immediately. Upon revival, unless it's to murmur something self-effacing like, "Oh dear, how silly of me." What follows is an entire list of fainting faux pas. Never faint too noisily. Never use a fainting spell to avoid paying a bill, common, apparently. And under no circumstance should one faint onto a stranger's lap, no matter how rakishly he's dressed. That's how duels get started. You turn the page. Acceptable tonic recipes for the nervous soul. One includes warm milk, cloves, and a single drop of laudanum. Another calls for orange peel, brandy, and whispered prayer. The etiquette book is like a survival manual for the terminally delicate. But there's something weirdly comforting in it too. In its own frantic, rule-swathed way, it's saying, here's how to navigate a world built on the assumption that you must never do anything abruptly. Even your handwriting is regulated. Letters should be sloped just so assertive enough to be legible, but not so bold as to seem opinionated. Your signature? Flourished, but not flamboyant. And don't even get started on mourning stationery. You'll need 2 sets, one for deep grief and another for light bereavement. Both must be edged in black. You sigh and set the book. Aside, your head mildly spinning. It's no wonder people fainted. Merely existing in this society was an endurance test of posture, perfume, and powdered restraint. Louisa once got scolded by an aunt for sneezing with her eyes open. Too abrupt, the woman sniffed as though Louisa had bellowed a war cry. And your poor cousin Edith was nearly disinherited after she replied, "Indeed, twice in a single evening." It implies disinterest, her mother hissed. Or worse sarcasm. Still, you can't help but admire the commitment. There's a kind of artistry to it, this performative elegance, the deliberate restraint, the gentle navigation of every interaction as though it were a swan gliding over a pond of quicksand. Of course, etiquette extended to furniture too. One should never recline too dramatically unless ill. One should never place both elbows on the fainting couch at once. And if you accidentally fall asleep mid-conversation, you must wake with a start and whisper, "Forgive me, I was overwhelmed by the poetry of your thoughts." Even children weren't spared. There are full sections on the correct way to curtsy, to ask for jam, and to receive a compliment without appearing eager. You picture a small Victorian girl trying to bow while balancing a tea tray, and you feel exhausted on her behalf. Outside, rain begins to tap softly against the windows, just enough to underscore the moment with cinematic flair. You lean back, decorously of course, and consider what would happen if you simply broke all the rules. laughed loudly, sat with both feet tucked under you. Ate a scone in one bite, you smile, then you adjust your gloves. Perhaps another time, for now, the book returns to the table, its pages whispering secrets from a world where decorum was armor, and a fainting spell could be as expressive as a manifesto. The fainting couch creaks slightly as you shift your weight, the wood frame groaning in that familiar, judgmental tone it always seems to take when you settle in for what may be your fourth rest of the day, but no one minds. Least of all the quiet army of people whose unseen hands have made every one of your faintings, rests, and gracefully wilted poses possible. Ah yes, the staff. It's easy to forget, amid all the sighing and tea sipping, that there's a whole downstairs universe, operating just beneath your daybed. A gentle battalion of maids, footmen, cooks, and coachmen who live on a hair-trigger readiness to respond when someone in brocade needs a moment. You close your eyes, thinking of Anna, your lady's maid, who spent the last 6 months predicting your swoons with eerie accuracy. She has fainting couch radar. You so much as glance wistfully at a curtain tassel, and she's already fluffed a cushion and set a fan at the ready. It's her soft, practical hands that help unlace your corset when the dizziness becomes more than ornamental. Her fingers that steady you as you sink backward with all the drama of an exhausted swan. Anna knows the exact moment to murmur, "Let's get you lying down, miss," with the tone of someone who has already calculated the arc of your collapse. Historians still argue whether the domestic staff's role in managing fainting spells was part of genuine care or simply part of the broader performance of elite womanhood. After all, your swoons don't make much sense without someone nearby to catch you, revive you, and critically pretend not to roll their eyes while doing it. You remember last Tuesday's incident mid-visit from the rector. He'd begun expounding, for reasons still unclear, on the symbolic weight of turnip farming. You blinked, felt the familiar warmth behind your ears, and allowed gravity to gently tug you sideways. Anna caught you with the grace of someone retrieving a falling souffle. She dabbed your brow, whispered, "So pale, miss," and waved the salts just close enough to wake you, but not so close you'd smell them for a week. Then she angled you artfully against the upholstery and stepped back, barely smirking as the rector stammered an apology and changed the subject to marmalade exports. Even now, as you sit sipping tepid tea, you can hear her somewhere nearby folding linens or selecting which of your shawls best says, "I am emotionally weathered, but still elegant." Below stairs, the other staff members discuss the upstairs faintings with a casual expertise that borders on sport. You're certain they rank them: the dramatic flop, the whimper and glide, the full queen of tragedy pose. You've likely earned a few accolades yourself, especially for that time you fainted during a family portrait and took out a vase on your way down. That one had flair, but there's more to it than just catching and reviving. Servants carried the emotional load too. They kept secrets. If a fainting spell happened after an argument, they politely never mentioned it. If one occurred following a mysterious letter from a gentleman caller, they'd quietly remove the letter, press a damp cloth to your forehead, and pretend the sender's name was never spoken aloud. One of the footmen, James, once carried you up a full flight of stairs after a particularly aggressive cravat gave you the vapors. You remember his arms steady, respectful, and blessedly unjudging as he murmured, "We'll have you right again soon, miss," like you were a dropped teacup rather than a grown woman unraveling in public. There's a tenderness to it all. Or maybe just a rhythm. The staff understand the beats of your day. They know the signs, the pre-swoon pacing, the post-bath days, the exact number of seconds you'll stand in a doorway before declaring yourself overcome. Sometimes you envy them their freedom to move briskly, to sweat openly, to sit down without 15 layers of brocade between them and the chair. But mostly, you're just grateful for their quiet competence. Of course, not all mistresses are. as considerate as you. Louisa once told you her cousin fired a maid for failing to arrive swiftly enough with a lemon compress. Apparently, the poor girl had dared to be halfway through the laundry when her lady swooned 3 rooms away. Unacceptable. You'd never do that. You know the difference between service and servitude, between caretaking and performative caretaking. And besides, you suspect Anna could unlace your corset in a way that would make you reconsider ever standing up again. Should you cross or dot the couch, dip slightly as someone speak of the devil places a warm cloth on your forehead. You peek. With one eye, Anna, of course. You've had a long day, miss, she says gently. You nod. You have. So many sighs, so many forced smiles. So many conversations about ivy wallpaper. The cloth smells faintly of chamomile and starch. It is oddly perfect. You settle deeper into the cushions, grateful beyond words for the hands that keep you from slipping through the cracks of your own performance. And as the parlor quiets, and the servants move like ghosts between the walls of your perfectly curated life, you let yourself drift, knowing, without a doubt, that someone will be there to catch you. You stir gently on the couch, just enough to cause the fringe on your shawl to sway like a sleeping cat's tail. The room has grown dim, all soft candlelight and quiet ticking from the ormolu clock on the mantel. A servant passes silently behind. You, adjusting the heavy velvet drapes to keep out the evening chill. The fainting couch cradles your spine like it was carved for this precise level of fragile collapse. You open one eye and look at the furniture. It looks back, probably. Victorian pieces always feel slightly sentient, and none more so than this. Your ever-present swoon throne, the fainting couch, with its elegant curves and one high-side design to catch the head of the weary and theatrically inclined, has become more than a place to lie down. It's become a symbol of softness, of surrender, of everything womanhood was expected to be: lovely, languid, and conveniently horizontal. Historians still argue whether the fainting couch was created out of necessity for the corset afflicted, or whether it evolved as a domestic prop to reinforce a kind of dainty helplessness. Whichever the truth, it performed its job well. After all, when society tells you that resting is your duty and fragility your virtue, eventually someone has to invent a piece of furniture that lets you faint with panache. You trail your fingers along its carved wooden edge, mahogany, polished. Within an inch of its life, the upholstery is plush but firm stuffed, quite possibly with horsehair and aristocratic dreams. The fabric is a pale rose brocade, slightly worn in the middle from years of dramatic use. You imagine how many women have reclined on similar couches, all with different worries but the same tight bodices. It's no coincidence that the furniture of the day echoed the ideals of its society. Chairs were stiff and upright for discipline. Beds were vast and shrouded for privacy. But the fainting couch was intimate, feminine, decorative, and delicate. Like the women who used them expected to be soft enough to sink, but not so soft as to be noticed doing it. There was no male equivalent to this piece. Men had lounges, armchairs, and studies. Their furniture was heavy, grounded, vaguely smug. But the fainting couch belonged to you, to the boudoir, the parlor, the drawing room. It was your space to disappear into without needing permission or apology. You remember your aunt once saying, with great solemnity, a woman's soul must be like her furniture, pleasing to the eye, but never too obvious. She had 2 fainting couches and a reputation for swooning during hymns. There were whole design trends based around accommodating the exhausted lady. Sloping backrests, curved armrests, even little tables attached for resting a single hand, a teacup, or your dignity. You think of all the moments you've spent here. That time you tried to read Mary Wollstonecraft and your mother caught you, prompting a fainting episode that was half shock and half strategic retreat. Or that winter you had a spell every day at 3 p.m. precisely, which suspiciously coincided with your least favorite visitor's arrival. And there's more so many whisper conversations, slow recoveries, faint dreams half remembered. Under the embroidered throw blanket, the couch has heard secrets, muffled laughs, small sobs. It's been everything from a confession booth to a launch pad for tactical naps. Some decorators even matched fainting couches to their mistress's emotional palette. Pale blue for the demure, deep crimson for the dramatic. Yours is soft rose, which you once claimed was chosen for the way it matched your constitution. Everyone nodded politely. No one questioned what that meant. You stretch one leg slightly, revealing a dainty slipper before modestly tucking it back under your skirts. The couch creaks in approval or warning. Hard to say. Either way, it seems to understand you. There's a particular art to how you use this furniture. One does not simply throw oneself onto it. One must descend with intent. Lower the body with a sigh. Drape the arm with precision. Allow the head to tilt just enough to suggest you're thinking about the nature of mortality, but not enough to disrupt your coiffure. You once practiced your fainting posture in the mirror, adjusting for what you called maximum sympathy angle, chin tucked, shoulders soft, one gloved hand just slightly outstretched, as if reaching for help or possibly another biscuit. You smile faintly now, remembering it, and the couch, as ever, supports your indulgence. Outside, twilight has deepened. The gas lamps flicker in the mist. Indoors, your world is one of hushed tones and polished surfaces. And this couch, this marvel of upholstery, is your constant companion. It doesn't judge when you collapse in genuine fatigue. It doesn't question your motives when you accidentally swoon mid-discussion of harvest yields. It simply waits, arms open, ready to receive your latest episode of fashionable distress. And in that way, it reflects the era itself. A place that simultaneously demanded perfection and permitted very few ways to escape it, unless, of course, you fainted. Sigh again, more from habit than necessity. The room echoes it softly. You adjust your shawl. The couch sighs back. The relationship is mutual. The fire crackles gently now, casting amber ripples across the fainting couch as you tilt your head back and stare at the ceiling's intricate plasterwork. You can feel it, the weight of the day pressing lightly on your ribs, or perhaps that's just the corset again. Your breathing, though slow, is shallow, not by choice, but by design. And not your design either. You shift slightly, enough to draw in a deeper breath, but it catches. It always catches. And that's the point, really. See, the Victorians weren't merely obsessed with appearances and etiquette. They were also deeply invested in something we'd now call pseudoscience, and something they quite earnestly believed was actual medicine. Enter the scientific explanation for feminine frailty. You've heard it all. That a woman's uterus was a wandering creature capable of hijacking the rest of her organs. That too much reading might shrink your womb. That too much education would draw vital energies away from your reproductive duties and watch them. Unfortunately, in your brain, historians still argue whether these medical facts were believed wholeheartedly by the public, or if they served mostly as a convenient way to justify existing gender roles. But what's clear is that science, or something pretending very hard to be it, was enlisted to prove that you were too delicate to function without constant supervision and frequent horizontal repose. Your doctor once explained, gently, that the female body simply wasn't built for walking long distances unchaperoned. That climbing stairs too quickly could disrupt your blood's natural decorum. That emotional excitement, especially the dangerous kind like ambition or curiosity, could trigger nervous disorders, or worse, turn your complexion slightly ruddy. Imagine, You were taught that fainting wasn't weakness, it was evidence of refinement. Your cousin George, who never faints but often forgets his waistcoat, is said to be dependable. You, with your occasional collapses and permanent bonnet collection, are said to be sensitive. It's meant as a compliment. You think, it's curious, this Victorian science. On one hand, it gave names to invisible ailments, neurasthenia, hysteria, nervous exhaustion. On the other hand, it gave wildly contradictory advice. Rest, but exercise. Eat more, but don't gain weight. Avoid overstimulation, but do keep up with your embroidery. You're reminded of an article you once read aloud at a gathering, scandalous. Behavior, truly, that claimed women had smaller brain cases, and thus should avoid critical thinking lest it result in dizziness or, heaven forbid, fainting. A gentleman in the corner coughed into his teacup, and the hostess swiftly declared the topic unfit for polite conversation. That's how science worked in your world. As long as it reinforced what everyone already believed, it was truth. And the truth was that your bones were dainty, your blood flow unreliable, and your mind simply too dreamy to handle things like arithmetic or complex spatial reasoning. So you took your place on the couch, a passive figure in a scene staged by someone else. Your ailments were fashionable, and your furniture confirmed them, but sometimes you wonder what might happen if you stood up, took a deep breath, and walked briskly into the street. Without so much as a gloved escort, would you survive? Would the world collapse into scandalized gasps? Or would it simply carry on? Not that you'd try it. Probably for now. You sink back. The couch knows your shape well. The faint ridges of the upholstery cradle your shoulder blades. You breathe again gently this time. There's no rush. Your lungs are rationed out like good lace. You think about your friend Clara, who recently read a French medical journal in secret. It claimed fainting spells were often caused not by hysteria, but by anemia and poor air circulation. Clara now insists on opening all her windows and eating liver. She hasn't fainted in a week, and frankly, you're not sure what to do with that information. Still, it makes you wonder. You remember the galvanic corsets? Those strange contraptions that use tiny electric currents to stimulate female vitality. Louisa had one. She said it made her feel like her kidneys were arguing. The doctor assured her that was simply the humors realigning. There's a low hum in the parlor now. The soft murmur of conversation, a distant violin being poorly tuned, the rhythmic tick of that same ormolu clock. You were present, but at the edges, like wallpaper. Decorative, not quite heard, never missed unless you're gone. You shift again, your fingers tracing idle swirls on the couch cushion beside you. This furniture, for all its plushity, has been a kind of holding cell, a stage, a padded observation deck from which to watch a world that doesn't trust you to stand. But not today. You're content to rest. Not because science insists you must or because society expects you to, but because, for the moment, the fire is warm, your breath is steady, and the couch your constant, ridiculous companion has softened just enough beneath you to make you feel weightless, and that, science or not, is worth something. A muffled thud interrupts your reverie. Someone in the next room has dropped a decanter, followed by the unmistakable clatter of ice cubes skittering across a parquet floor. You blink slowly, awaiting the polite chorus of gasps, the hasty footsteps of staff, and yes, there it is, a male voice exclaiming, "I'm quite all right. Amen." So robust, so not prone to fainting. Or so they'd like everyone to believe. You shift your weight, propping yourself slightly higher on your fainting couch, and muse on the double standard that so thoroughly permeates this age of decorum and digestive bitters. For while women's swoons were expected even, choreographed men's collapses were treated either as battlefield, epics, or unfortunate lapses in character. Historians still argue whether men truly fainted less in Victorian times, or whether they simply rebranded their episodes as sudden exhaustion, momentary lightheadedness, or your personal favorite, a temporary poetic turn. Your own brother Henry once staggered to the nearest armchair after hearing he'd been left off the guest list for the seasonal hunt. He claimed it was a nervous pallor brought on by social disillusionment. You watched him down a brandy and adjust his cravat, then quietly asked if he would like some of your salts. He declined with a wounded sniff, muttering something about preserving masculine dignity. Men, of course, had their own medical afflictions, mostly diagnosed by doctors with dramatically curled mustaches and a fondness for Latin. Brain fever was a favorite, vague, dramatic, and wonderfully non-specific. Neurasthenia, too supposedly caused by overwork, intellectual strain, and the modern burden of telegrams. You once read a pamphlet that claimed the modern city man's nervous system was like a harp constantly strummed by the fingers of progress. You imagined your Uncle Rupert's scalp twitching as he tried to balance a bank ledger while a harpist performed Handel in the corner. But here's the difference. When men were exhausted, they were sent on fishing retreats. When women were exhausted, they were sent to lie down for weeks, sometimes months, in rooms with lace curtains and doctors who frowned when you asked for novels. Louise's cousin was once ordered to take an aggressive holiday after suffering what the family called a tax-induced spell. He was given cigars, sea air, and a firm handshake. You were given more baths. The underlying message was always the same. Male exhaustion is noble. Female exhaustion is suspicious. You once tried to explain this to your physician. He blinked twice, and then prescribed more foot soaks with rose oil to soothe social overstimulation. And yet, though rarely discussed, the loud men did faint. They fainted in battle, in courtrooms, in overly warm drawing rooms after hearing about their investments. They swooned from blood loss, bad oysters, or occasionally from standing too long in formal shoes. But these were labeled differently. Not fainting, no, collapsing, succumbing, experiencing a manly bout of temporary unconsciousness due to extremely reasonable circumstances. There was even a kind of romance to it. A man fainting from poetic anguish. Dashing, a woman fainting from corset strain. Predictable. You remember a salon conversation in which a man fresh from reading Byron declared that he sometimes saw stars when contemplating the futility of man's place in the universe. Everyone nodded reverently. When you said you saw stars whenever you wore your second best corset, someone offered you a cushion. The hypocrisy is, of course, as deeply stitched into Victorian society as your embroidered chemise. But you must admit, it's also rather funny. There's Henry again, passing your doorway now with a stack of ledgers and a look of determined melancholy. You watch him pause, sigh heavily, then rub his forehead in the classic gesture of a man who believes he is deeply misunderstood. He sees you watching, straightens, smiles awkwardly, probably about to faint at the weight of his own feelings, but would rather explode than do it in front of the fainting couch. You offer a courteous nod, then return your gaze to the ceiling. And then there are the writers. The romantic men who wandered misty hillsides and wrote verses about sighing and drooping. Their words flit through your mind now. Pale is my cheek, for I have thought too long upon the fragile world. He probably fainted after writing that, flat out in a field somewhere. Probably blamed the altitude. Even doctors weren't immune. One case in a medical journal described a physician fainting during surgery, not from the sight of blood. He insisted, but from acute professional responsibility. The patient, a local milliner, wasn't impressed. Still, despite the pomp, the gendered lens of fainting has begun to shift ever so slightly. You've noticed younger women rolling their eyes more frequently. Older ones sitting with their backs fully against the chair, not just the edge. Even Anna, your maid, has started fainting less and sighing more, and maybe you don't need to collapse quite so often either. Maybe your couch could serve a new purpose as a place to recline by choice, not necessity, but not just yet, because at this very moment there's a fresh tray of lemon biscuits on the sideboard, and you suspect Henry will have eaten them all. By the time you muster the social stamina to rise dot, so you let your head fall gently to the side. Not a faint, not exactly. Just a nap, with flair. Your dreams are filled with the scent of cardamom and the rustle of palm fronds. When you stir, it takes a moment to remember where you are, or rather, where you aren't. You're not in your parlor, not in your drawing room, and certainly not in the chilly fog of an English morning. No, you're reclining on a fainting couch in a colonial bungalow, somewhere in the sultry shade of British India. The air is thick with humidity, even though the ceiling fan above you operated by a servant tugging a cord in the corner whirs with rhythmic determination. The fabric of your gown clings slightly, not from exertion, but from the ever-present film of tropical air that settles on everything, including your moral compass. The couch beneath you isn't quite like the one back home. It's built lighter, made of teak and cane, designed to endure the heat. But its purpose is familiar. You've swooned here too dramatically, decorously, sometimes sincerely. Because even in the colonies, where everything is hotter, spicier, more vivid and disorienting, a lady must uphold her standard of delicate exhaustion. You squint at the shuttered windows. Bright light slants in through green-painted slats. Outside, the world hums with unfamiliar birdsong, distant drums, and the clatter of market carts. Historians still argue whether the fainting rituals of colonial women were truly health responses to an overwhelming environment, or whether they were yet another expression of transplanted Victorian fragility made to thrive stubbornly in inappropriate climates. The local servants have adapted to your rhythms. They bring chilled rose water, fan you with folded palm leaves. They no longer raise eyebrows when you suddenly declare, "I must rest," after reading a letter from home, or encountering a particularly alarming curry. You shift slightly on the couch. The pillows are embroidered with unfamiliar motifs lotus, flowers, elephants, peacocks, all painstakingly stitched, likely by someone whose name you'll never learn. You think, not for the first time, about how surreal it is to perform British womanhood in the middle of such overwhelming otherness. To cling to lace gloves and etiquette manuals while the streets outside teem with languages and customs you do not understand, but are quietly expected to govern. Your cousin Adelaide fainted during her first week here, out of genuine shock when she realized breakfast included mangoes and servants barefoot indoors. "I simply wasn't prepared," she whispered later, sipping lime water and dabbing her temples. "They brought me fruit." With no cutlery. You too have had your moments. The heat, the unfamiliar spices, the sheer brightness of everything. It presses on your temples in ways English weather never dared. But there's more to it, isn't there? Beneath the fainting lies a sort of tension. You've been told you're here to bring civilization, but the land resists being curated. It's not a drawing room. It doesn't care for your fainting rituals or your scented letters from Yorkshire. It simply is. You overheard a British officer once declare, "The women must remain genteel, or the entire system collapses." As though the empire depended on your ability to faint appropriately during afternoon tea. Still, the performance continues. You host card parties, arrange lace cloths over humid tables, pose ever so delicately on your tropical fainting couch, while the gramophone plays something vaguely British in the background. Yet, you can't help but notice the cracks. You sweat more freely here. You laugh a little louder, and you've begun taking your tea iced. Scandalous though that may be, even your fainting has changed. It's less performative, more pragmatic. The heat stills your breath in ways no corset ever did. And sometimes, when the air thickens and the world spins, you truly do need to lie down. The fainting couch has become less of a stage and more of a raft. You watch as a servant refills your water glass. His hands are deft, practiced. He doesn't meet your eyes. You wonder what he thinks of this whole arrangement, the furniture, the dresses, the small explosions of English, fragility in a place that thrums with monsoons and markets. You once tried to faint politely during a thunderstorm. The locals, unimpressed, simply stepped over you and secured the shutters. Perhaps the fainting couch has traveled farther than it was ever meant to. Perhaps it too is confused. Designed to cradle the imagined frailty of empire, now soaked in sweat and colonial tension, you lean back again, closing your eyes against the heat, letting the scents of cardamom and tamarind wrap around you like incense. There's a fan at your side and a mango on the table. Somewhere, someone is singing a tune you don't recognize, and it makes your heart ache not out of faintness, but from something deeper. You don't faint this time. You just rest, quietly, no drama. No sigh, just the sound of a teak chair, creaking under the weight of an identity that no longer fits as easily as it once did. You're standing now, or at least you're attempting to. Your knees wobble with the determination of someone who's spent the better part of a decade using a fainting couch as a moral compass. But the world is changing. And the drawing room is no longer the only stage. The air outside smells different. Not just of coal smoke and perfume, but of ink, movement, urgency. There's shouting, not angry, not frightened, purposeful, rhythmic, and female. You step toward the window and peek. Between the curtains, a march, a banner. A group of women walking arm in arm, boots clicking smartly on the cobblestones. Votes for Women, one of their sashes reads, loud and proud in a shade of green that dares you to scoff. You draw in your breath deeply. This time and glance back at your fainting couch. It's been your confidant, your excuse, your velvet escape route. And yet, today, it looks more like an exhibit in a museum about who you used to be. Historians still argue whether fainting truly declined as a social custom because women became hardier, or because society finally stopped insisting they were ornamental, creatures powered entirely by lace and polite oppression. But one thing is clear, by the time suffragettes stormed Parliament, few of them brought fainting couches along. You think of Clara again, your friend, with the open windows and iron supplements. She joined a political society last year, wrote a letter to the Times, gave a speech that made several clergymen drop their sandwiches. She's not fainted in months. At first, you thought she'd changed, become someone else, but now, perhaps she's just remembered who she was before the corsets, the etiquette books, and the constant pressure to sigh instead of speak. You take a step away from the window and look around the room. Everything is as it has always been, the heavy curtains, the ticking clock, the scent of violets and starch. And yet it all feels stagey, like props waiting to be struck. Louisa Faithful, lovely Louisa, recently announced she's going to a rally, not to watch, to participate. She bought new boots for it, sensible ones. Not fainting shoes. Not shoes designed to lie down in. She invited you to come too. You made an excuse, something vague about a sore temple and overstimulated nerves. But now, staring at that couch, at the indentation your spine has carved into it over the years, you wonder what would happen if you said yes. The truth is, the world outside the drawing room has always frightened you, not for what it is, but for what it might demand of you. It doesn't have velvet corners or floral upholstery. There's no staff to catch you if you collapse. No salts waiting in silver cases. Out there you must stand. You sit back down gently, not theatrically. Your body still understands the faint, but your mind is shifting. The couch doesn't embrace you as tightly this time. Or perhaps you're just no longer sinking into it as fully. You picture a different sort of furniture. Harder chairs, perhaps. Soapbox tops. Railway benches where women sit en route to rallies and reading rooms and lectures, with titles like The False Fragility of the Female Frame, and then there's the jail benches. You've heard about those too. Some suffragettes fainted. But not from corsets or polite conversation. They fainted from hunger strikes and beatings, from being force-fed, locked away, forgotten by the very society they were trying to improve. You admire them, fiercely, fearfully, and you think, maybe the couch had its moment, maybe it still does in small doses, but fainting, no. Longer feels like a language you want to speak fluently, not when others are shouting in full voice and being heard. The door creaks. Anna stands there holding a hat box. "Miss Clara sent this," she says with a neutral expression and a twinkle. In her eye, you open it slowly. Inside, a hat, broad-brimmed, practical. Not for promenades or perching by windows. For walking, marching, standing. You smile. You think about your boots. You think about how your ankles haven't really been tested since. You tripped over a potted fern during your dramatic collapse in '87. "Could you fetch my walking gloves?" You ask Anadot. She blinks. Of course. You rise steadily, surprisingly so, and adjust your skirts. They're a little stiff from years of delicate sitting, but they'll move. You just have to remind them how. You glance back one last time. At the couch, it sits silently, regal, almost proud. As if it knows you're not abandoning it entirely, just updating your relationship. You walk toward the door. Outside, the voices grow louder, and you, once faint, now follow. You walk slowly at first, half expecting the pavement to tilt beneath you like a parlor rug pulled from under your skirts. But it doesn't. The cobblestones are solid, firm beneath your practical boots, no heels, no delicate buckles. Your body, unencumbered by a corset for the first time in what feels like decades, responds with cautious enthusiasm. You clutch your new hat to your chest as the morning wind tousles your hair just slightly out of place. It's liberating. It's a bit chilly. It's mildly scandalous. The crowd ahead is impossible to miss. Not loud, but determined. A river of women in smart coats and firm brows, flowing together toward a square that has never once been interested in their opinions until now. You fall into step beside Clara, who grins when she sees you, as though she knew you'd show. Up all along, no couch today? She teases, only metaphorically. You reply, adjusting your gloves with a theatrical flourish. There's no fainting today. No recourse to salts or soft collapses. Today your spine does the work your couch used to do, supporting you without upholstery. It feels foreign. It feels natural that you march. The wind tugs at banners and hat brims. The cobblestones clack under the echo of footsteps. And while you're surrounded by other women, some young, some as lined and layered as the buildings around, you've never felt so individually present. Historians will someday look back and wonder why women waited so long to stand, why so many centuries were spent in restful repose while the world raced past, and maybe they'll misunderstand it. Maybe they'll imagine the fainting couch as a prison, or worse, a choice. Maybe they won't realize that sometimes lying down was survival. Other times it was protest in silk gloves, but today is different. Today is about rising, and yet, when you return home a little tired, a little exhilarated, the couch is still there. Of course it is. Loyal and lovely in the corner, exactly where you left it. The sun hits it at a slant, warming its curved edge. You can't help but walk over and trail your fingers along its back. You remember the times it held you, not just physically, but emotionally. When the world pressed too hard and fainting was the only language your body had left, the couch never judged you. It never rolled. Its eyes. It never asked why you were lying down again. You sit, not collapse, not swoon. Just sit, like a person with thoughts and a pulse and a newly rediscovered center of gravity. Don't you think of the other women? Still marching, still shouting. You think of Clara's proud grin, of the weight of the sash she pinned across her chest. You think of Anna, who probably rolled her eyes behind closed doors every time you rang the bell with a faint in progress, but still brought the salts every time. Maybe you'll march again tomorrow. Maybe you'll write something bold. Maybe you'll rest, because claiming power doesn't always mean standing. Sometimes it means knowing when to lie down and when to get up taut, and today you got up at the couch, creaked softly beneath you, familiar as breath. Not a stage now, not a crutch, just a couch. And you still you, but more. You lean back, eyes fluttering closed, not fainting, not escaping. Just resting, and maybe, just maybe, that's revolutionary too. Now the march has passed, the banners are folded. The boots are by the door, you're no longer walking. You're drifting safely, slowly, with every breath growing a little softer than the last. Your fainting couch, still warm from the days. Quiet revelations cradles you in the fading amber light. The world outside dims, its noises softening into nothing more than the hush of evening. No rallies, no speeches, no expectations. You feel your shoulders melt downward, your lungs open. Wider, your fingers uncurl one by one. The shadows stretch across the floorboards like lazy cats. Even the ticking clock slows its rhythm, matching the gentle pace of your pulse. There's nothing left to perform, no feint to stage, no opinion to whisper behind a gloved hand. Just you, and the velvet beneath you, and the safe knowledge that you've moved through something without collapsing, without retreating. You've stood, and now you've earned your quiet. Outside, a breeze sighs through the curtains. Somewhere someone lights a lamp, but your world is already dimmed to the softest gray. Your thoughts float, featherlight, toward sleep. Let them. Drift. Let your breath come easier. You're safe here. And warm. And whole dot. And when you wake, you'll still be you, but a little more upright than before. Sweet dreams.